I'm Stephen Bath. I'm one of the third generation to work for the company Bath Travel, founded by my grandfather, Reginald Ernest Bath, in 1924. My father took over the business in 1954. I joined in 1972, working as a rep in Mallorca, and I've been with the company for 45 years altogether. Reginald Bath was quite an important character in this. He didn't just run a travel agency, he took lots of quite risky moves. Well, in 1924 things were very different, and the only way to get to America was by steamship, and a lot of people were emigrating to the United States, and he sold tickets on the transatlantic voyages. Then later, when air travel got dominant after the war, the hundreds and hundreds of steamers that took people all over the world to Australia, New Zealand and the States and so on, became cruise ships and went round to the Mediterranean on pleasure trips, and he sold tickets for those as well, and the business grew and grew. Obviously, for D-Day in 1944, there were hundreds of thousands of American and Canadian troops here in the central South, and a lot of them hooked up with local English girls, but couldn't get back to see them, so he chartered Pan American aircraft to reunite the GI brides with their partners in the US. In the 50s, most people who left Britain to the continent went to Switzerland or the south of France, thus the Promenade des Anglais. But he was particularly keen on Bermuda, and for the last 2 years of working in Bournemouth, he would only speak to people who wanted to go to Bermuda. In 1951, he married his 19-year-old secretary, his fourth wife, took her to Bermuda, where he died 6 years later, leaving Bath Travel to be run by my father, Peter Bath, in 1954. My father took the business from one office to 67. Palmair started almost by accident. A man called Sir Henry Lunn had chartered a 37-seater plane to fly from Gatwick, London Gatwick, to Mallorca. My father had sold 17 of the seats, but with a month to go, he got the bad news that the plane was still half empty and it would have to be cancelled. So my father, being a very, very keen gambler and risk taker, said, "Don't worry, Henry, fly the plane to Bournemouth and I'll fill it from here," which he did, and that's what gave him the idea of starting his own charter operation. In 1959, he chartered BEA Viscount aircraft, 58-seaters from Bournemouth, which flew to Palma, landing at Toulouse for fuel, and that was the start of Palmair, and the name was coined that year. But this was the early 60s when package holidays were starting to take off, and we were virtually the first package tour operator in Britain. We had atoll license number 3. Mallorca was the only destination for quite a few years. Then he started flying to the Costa Brava, Benidorm, Alicante, and it expanded very, very quickly. In 1965, we stopped using propeller planes because we had the locally built BAC 111 jets, 110-seaters, and we could get to Palma in 1 hour, 55 minutes non-stop. PJ lived in Southbourne, which was only 10 minutes drive to the airport, and so for the first few flights, he went out to the airport to see his passengers, to greet them, to see who they were, and he enjoyed doing that. 40 years later, he was seeing off 350 flights a year, and by that time he lived only 5 minutes from the airport, so he could actually keep it going. And he did it until the year before he died. From about 1990, we started expanding very quickly, 2 or 3 branches a year. So we had branches from Torquay to Marlborough in the north, Aldershot, even near Gatwick we had offices, 5 on the Isle of Wight, and importantly, we had a lot of offices around Southampton. In the Falklands War in 1982, P&O had the Canberra, Cunard had the QE2. Within 25 years, P&O had 11 ships and Cunard had 3, and we were right at the epicentre of the explosion in the cruise business. I remember the year that we did our first £1 million for P&O in a single year, and they came round with champagne. Within 30 years, we were doing £70 million for P&O and Cunard, and we were one of their biggest agents in Britain. For 25 years, my father chartered whatever aircraft he could get his hands on, all sorts of little airlines like Dan Air, Air Europa, Air Cymru from Wales. He chartered into Bournemouth. But after Gulf War I of 1991, the invasion of Kuwait, all those little airlines went bust. And in the year 1993, we had no choice but to start our own airline because there were no airlines left. And that was how Palmair Flight Line was formed, and it started in April 93. So the plane that we selected to use and name in our own fashion was a BA 146 Whisperjet 110-seater. It was super quiet, the residents of Bournemouth loved it, it had 4 engines, it was safe, reliable, and above all it lived at Bournemouth. We only had 6 destinations, we did one every day, On the 7th day, it was free to do something else. So I had the idea that we could do day trips, and it became one of the most important things that the airline ever did. The best destination in 1993 was the best destination forevermore. It was Venice. Venice, we could have just done Venice every week for months and months and months, but we tried to vary it. We took trips to the south of France, to Madrid, to Iceland, which was very popular, Krakow in Poland. Over the years, we probably did about 40 or 50 different destinations, but the Italian cities were the most successful. Eventually, we had the idea of doing day trips to places that even our plane couldn't reach, and we decided to do a day trip from Bournemouth to Cairo in Egypt so people could go to the pyramids for the day. It was a 5-hour flight each way, leaving at 5 in the morning, getting back at midnight, and it was so popular that we put 3 on, including one to Luxor, so people could actually go and visit Tutankhamun's tomb in the Valley of the Kings and be home in Winton for midnight. One of the reasons why the day trips were so popular was because we had our own airline, our own stewardesses and pilots and escorts, including a very popular chap called Rob Nichol, who took all our day trips. People loved it that they could fly on a friendly airline with stewardesses who they knew, who knew their names, and frequently my father would be there to see them off in the morning and see them back in the evening. We enjoyed taking risks, and we were big enough with so many branches that we could almost make anything happen under pressure. We did the first Concorde charter on Sunday, the 21st of April 1996. We knew it was going to be quite a big deal, but we didn't expect 25,000 people to come to the airport to see the aircraft. The traffic jams went right back to the town centre. But it was a wonderful day. It was sunny. We had all our staff there. We had helicopters. It was the biggest publicity stunt in the history of the airport. The aircraft landed in a cloud of smoke from the tyres. It taxied up to the airport. It was flown by the captain of the Concorde fleet, Mike Bannister, who had learnt to fly at Bournemouth 25 years earlier as a young cadet. As the charterer, I was allowed to nip upstairs and have a look in the cockpit, and I had a photographer there, and I got a picture of myself looking out of the window, and it was a very proud moment for me. But of course, it was the start of much more major things to come using Concorde in the future. We took Concordes in the next 4 years to Paris, Rome, Venice, Lanzarote, Istanbul, Tenerife. We took it everywhere we could. So in 1999, I had a small 757 from Bournemouth to New York. Next year, in 2000, I took a 327-seater wide-body plane to New York. Ever emboldened, the following year, I took a small plane from Exeter and had a big plane from Bournemouth. And by the end of August 2001, they were both full up with 540 passengers. We were delighted. And then, unfortunately, on September the 11th, something happened which changed world history, and it certainly changed the history of our New York flights. The phone started to ring. People didn't know whether the trip was on, whether it would be cancelled, whether it was even safe. My father decided that anybody of our 550 passengers booked wanted to cancel, they could have a full refund. And in the end, just 150 of us went on one small plane and visited the city, in accordance with the request by the famous then Mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, who said, please don't desert us in our hour of need. The following year, we were able to charter the biggest plane in the world, a Boeing 747 jumbo jet from Bournemouth to New York with 420 passengers. That flight in November 2002 was the biggest, heaviest, most heavily populated aircraft ever to fly out of Herne. In 2004, my father was very honoured to receive an MBE from the Queen at Buckingham Palace for services to travel and his Rotary charities. And just 2 years later, my father sadly died after a short illness, which was the end of an era for Bath Travel and the end of a legendary life. At the height of the cruise market, we were doing very well with cruises from Southampton for our local passengers, but we were aware that there was a discount cruise market where you could save a bit of money by booking through a cruise warehouse, so we started Cruise Saver. We decided to charter passenger trains from Scotland down to Southampton docks. We built our own platform in Southampton, and we brought people down from Glasgow and Edinburgh. And at the end of their 9-hour first-class silver service journey from Glasgow station, they're able to walk straight off the train onto our own platform built alongside the ship and start their cruise holiday, and when they got to their cabin, the luggage was there. In 2009, we started our third and final airline, Palmair Australis, with a much more modern Boeing 737-500, which was unveiled at an inaugural ceremony in one of the hangars at Bournemouth Airport, unveiled by my mother, and it was named the Spirit of Peter Bath, and its registration was Golf PJ. It was a very moving occasion, and I think a fitting tribute to a great man's career. So the launch of our final airline in 2009 was always going to be difficult. We were in the wake of the financial crash of 2008. No Frills Airlines were on the rise. In April 2010, the notorious Icelandic volcano blew, crippling the world's fleet for another week, which cost us a lot of money. And as Ryanair and the No Frills era continued to succeed, we had to take the reluctant decision to close the airline in the end of October 2010. It was a point of pride for us that when we closed the airline on the 31st of October 2010, that nobody was left out of pocket and the airline just quietly closed, and that was the end of the Palmair era. It was a great irony that an airline which for 12 of its 17 years had been voted Britain's best airline, and for 3 of those years the best in the world for its customer service and attention to detail, should succumb to the less popular No Frills Airlines, which truly stripped all romance from air travel. In October 2013, the Bath family sold to another family business, Hayes Travel, and the famous John Hayes, who not only kept the business going but expanded the offices in the south, and many of our staff are still happily working there today. The 90 years from 1924 to 2013 have been quite a journey. I truly believe that Bath Travel and Palmair were 2 of the best loved companies in Bournemouth.